Hello, my name is Petter Ögren and I'm a professor in computer science at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. In this video, we're going to talk about the top-down approach to writing reports and papers. The key message is that we don't want any surprises. Surprises are good in crime novels. You want the reader to be surprised by who the bad guy really is. But surprises are bad in scientific papers and technical reports. Because then you want the reader to understand something, and to understand something in a good way, you first want to paint the overall picture and then add details and in-depth understanding. So how do we avoid surprises? Well, the key thing is to start with a summary and then go into details. So this is about top-down writing, starting with a summary. So this is the key idea. On every level, the first part of a text summarizes the rest. And this is on every level of detail. So this is 4 pieces of text, large pieces, chapters, or small pieces, sentences, or medium-sized pieces, paragraphs. The first part should summarize the rest. So let's look at the scientific paper. You have the abstract and then you have a bunch of sections. Obviously, the abstract summarizes the sections. This is well known to everyone. And in some sense, the title should also summarize the paper. But on a lower level of detail, the idea with this approach is that in a section, say section 3, you have a bunch of paragraphs, and then the first paragraph should summarize the remaining paragraphs. And looking at a paragraph, the idea applies again. The first sentence should summarize the rest of the sentences. So let's look at some examples. So throughout this video, we're going to look at this paper, Kinodynamic RRT Star, Asymptotically Optimal Motion Planning for Robots with Linear Dynamics by Webb and van der Berg. It's a very nice paper, but we're going to look at it from a report writing or paper writing perspective, not go into any technical detail. Obviously, the abstract summarizes the rest of the paper. This is clear to everyone. But let's look at the abstract itself. The principle we're talking about is to have the first sentence summarize the rest of the sentences. Well, this is the abstract. The first sentence is, we present Kinodynamic RRT Star, an incremental sampling-based approach for asymptotically optimal motion planning for robots with linear dynamics. This kind of summarizes the whole paper. And as the title also summarizes the paper, the first sentence is very close to the actual title. It just has some additional information. And then the rest of the abstract goes on to provide details of this. Our approach extends RRT Star, blah, 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 generalizes the earlier work, and so on. We also demonstrate something. So all this is detailing the first sentence that summarizes the whole abstract. And as I said, this principle applies on all levels, at least on many levels. So let's look at section 2, related work. The first paragraph here is, the term kinodynamic planning was first introduced in 1993, blah, 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 which blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of the related work. The main idea was introduced some time back, and now we're going to look at details. But it also happens within paragraphs. So the first sentence of this paragraph, unfortunately, RRT does not produce optimal trajectories. And then they go on to add details. In fact, the probability, blah, 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 and so on. and paragraphs. So look, this is from section 4, optimally connecting a pair of states. There's an initial paragraph, and then there's some subsections. So looking at this initial paragraph with the yellow marked stuff here, there's lots of details, but we have to see through this, focusing on the report writing aspect. A critical component of our approach, blah, blah, blah. In this section, we discuss how to compute these. And then they go on to tell about what the subsections are going to be about. Section 4a does this, section 4b does this, 4c, and 4d. So it's really, this paragraph really summarizes the rest of the sections, the rest of the paragraphs. Looking at one of the subsections, this is 4c, I think, computing the optimal trajectory. What does the first sentence says? Well, given the optimal arrival time as defined above, we find the corresponding optimal trajectory, blah, 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 as follows. So we're going to find the optimal trajectory. And now let's get into details of how that happens. The first sentence summarizes what's going to come. No surprises. The very last section, section 8, discussion, conclusion, and future work. The first sentence summarizes the whole section. So this is conclusion, right? So we have presented, blah, blah, blah. This whole sentence is very close to the title of the paper and the first sentence of the abstract. Again, being a conclusion, they want to summarize what the paper is about, and the first sentence summarizing the whole paper, which is close to the title. No surprises. So, we've discussed this way of writing a paper. So then the question comes, is it hard or easy to write papers this way? Well, I'd like to say that the top-down approach makes writing easier. Because a lot of time when you're writing a text, you kind of hesitate and think about, what should I write now? Should I discuss this or that? Go into details? Or provide an overview? The top-down approach gives you structure that you can use when you write. So imagine you're writing a paper. What you have to do is just first summarize what you want to tell the reader and then explain it in more detail. So imagine you're working on section 2. What do? You start with the first paragraph on section 2, and that should summarize all of section 2. What is section 2 really about? What are you going to tell the reader? The first paragraph summarizes that. And going into the first paragraph, the first sentence should summarize that paragraph again. So you write the first sentence summarizing the paragraph that summarizes the section. Then you go on to provide the other sentences of the first paragraph that explains in a bit more detail what you wrote in sentence 1. Having the first paragraph there, you just add the other paragraphs, again detailing stuff that you summarized in paragraph 1. So remember, no surprises. While writing your paper, if you find yourself adding something, thinking of an important detail and adding that somewhere in paragraph 3 or something, and you realize, oh, I didn't mention this when writing paragraph 1, summarizing the section, maybe you need to re-edit paragraph 1 to make sure that no surprises pop up in paragraph 3 or somewhere else. Because if you tell the reader the summary first, then provide details, it's much easier to kind of follow the red thread, add knowledge, in-depth understanding as you go along. If you surprise the reader has to backtrack, think about what you told earlier, and see how this new piece of information matches the old information, and so on. Thank you for watching. I have 2 references for this video. First, it's by Bengt Temlin, sammanfattningsvis skulle jag vilja säga. It's an old book about this top-down approach, so to speak. And of course, the example we used, Kinodynamic RT star.